better quality products and services for their investments. And this is no exception to our construction industry. As we are aware today, our construction industry is confronted with many issues relating to quality, time, cost, reliance on foreign labor, and so on and so forth. We have a very long list. So consequently, the construction industry master plan was mooted by the government to chart the future direction of the construction industry, and at the same time in trying to circumvent these challenges. In our workshop today, we aim to examine the appropriate value that can be derived from within the construction industry for the key stakeholders, and in line with the objectives and the aims of construction industry master plan. Just to reaffirm, the construction industry master plan, which was mooted, was developed along 7 strategic thrusts. That is, strategic thrust 1 is to integrate the construction industry value chain to enhance productivity and efficiency. Strategic thrust 2 is to strengthen the construction industry image. Strategic thrust 3 is to strive for highest quality occupational health and safety and environment. Strategic thrust 4 is to develop the human capability and capacity. Strategic thrust 5 to innovate through R&D and the adoption of new construction materials. Strategic thrust 6 to leverage on information and communication technology. Strategic thrust 7 is to benefit from globalization. Now, the 7 strategic thrusts that has been underlined in the CIMP are the key elements of which should be the underpinning factors of our discussions and our workshop today. The issues of sustainability have duly been highlighted in CIMP as being of significant importance to the Malaysian construction industry. We are aware that the Malaysian Green Building Index have been developed. The introduction of the rating system and awareness of sustainability issues is one of the critical factors that has very much been talked about in the industry today. So for our workshop today, the workshop will include data collection, and we'll be analyzing the data, and this will be undertaken by CIDB, CREAM, UITM, and the University of Malaya, which are also consequently the organizers of this workshop this morning. And we are very honored to have today Professor Dr. Peter Barrett, the President of International Council of Research and Innovation and Construction, in short CIB, who will be leading the workshop and who will be facilitating the workshop that we have this morning. Now, let me just reaffirm before we start, the objective of our workshop today is to identify barriers and forces and restraining factors to the CIMP, to the Malaysian construction industry, based on the CIMP. Our objective number 2 is to realize the value of stakeholders for all and finding ways of how we can exploit drivers and remove barriers. Objective 3 is to indicate the project and solution that create the most value for construction and its practices, and finding the critical success factors. To formulate action and the way forward on the improvement of construction industry based on the recommendation highlighted in CIMP, and to capture the perspective of industry towards the development of Malaysian construction sustainability and green construction framework. Sounds very heavy, isn't it? I am sure as we go along, we should be able to dissect these issues one by one and have a clear direction on how we are going to address this. And on this, I think we can have the experience of Dr. Peter, Professor Peter, to assist us this morning. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have divided yourselves in groups, and in your groups we have repertoires who will be facilitating and who will be recording your discussions. They will be taking note of what will be discussed, and they will be summarizing. If you don't mind, we would like you to put down your names and addresses and your contact numbers and email and give them to the repertoires, because we will be contacting you and we'll be providing you and we'll be sharing with you the findings of our discussions today. If you can just do that before we finish the session this afternoon. All right. For our program this morning, there will be a slight change in the program, which is going to be slightly different from what you have on your table. I'm just going to start by inviting Professor Peter Barrett to straight away start our session. And along the way, he will be calling Encik Muhammad Nawi Dol, the head of the CIMP implementation unit, to reaffirm some of the elements of the CIMP in line with what we are going to discuss. And also we'll be inviting A.R. Chan Seong An, the Vice President of PAM, who will also be touching a little bit on the Green Building Index. All right, without taking much more time, allow me to introduce Professor Peter Barrett. Professor Peter Barrett is the President of the UN-established International Council for Research and Innovation in the Building Construction, or in short CIB, involving 2,000 experts in 60 countries. He is currently Chairman of the Salford Centre for Research and Innovation, SCRI, and a member of the UK National Platform for Construction and of the European Construction Technology Platform. He has produced over 170 single-volume publications, refereed papers and reports, and has made over 110 presentations around 16 countries. Peter has been leading the CIB initiative on revaluing construction for some years, and part of this concerns better understanding on how value from the built environment is gained by those in the society. This has led to work in areas of senses, brains, and spaces, i.e., how spaces are experienced by people through their senses and interpreted by their brains. The practical application of this interest has been around school buildings, and in particular, how to create optimal learning spaces. So, it is our great pleasure. Let's give a warm welcome to Professor Peter.
I'm joined by a whole group of people, and in particular the CIDB has been very supportive, and my colleagues here from the University of Malaya. And what we want to do is have a very interactive day where we're using your expertise. So it's not a matter of having a big event or anything like that. It's a matter of having people with expert opinions who can work in a particular way in order to throw light on this particular subject. We've done these workshops in 5 other countries, but they've tended to be sort of English-speaking Commonwealth sort of countries, and I'm very interested to see what issues come out in a different part of the world. And so it's an interesting experiment and an interesting exploration for me, but I hope as well that we can really resonate with your master plan and help take that forward. Okay, this thing's getting closer and closer. Thank you very much. So I thought it might be helpful just right at the start to clarify what revaluing construction is, just in very broad terms, because it's a bit of an unusual phrase, and then we'll get on with the rest of the programme as planned. And the history behind revaluing construction is that it's a proactive theme of the CIB. It's something where we try to bring together different disciplines, and it started off being called re-engineering construction, which may make more sense. It's sort of how can we make the whole process of construction work more efficiently and more effectively. And in broad terms, it's still looking at that sort of issue, but we changed, after a lot of discussion, the name to Revaluing Construction, because we wanted to actually put the emphasis on value. We wanted to take the emphasis away from just construction in some ways, and we wanted to look much more broadly about how the whole issue of value is dealt with by the construction sector. One of the reasons for that is that certainly in the UK, certainly in most European countries, these are the sorts of words that attach to the construction sector. It may be completely different here, I don't know, but things like confrontational, I don't know whether you have confrontational construction, we certainly do, quite combative. It may be that everybody gets on great in Malaysia and there's no problems and you all work perfectly together, I don't know. Lots of uninformed team members, cutthroat competition. You can see the phrases there. Those are the typical phrases that are used to describe construction in Europe. Organisational amnesia. This is the business of why when they do one good project do they come back the next time and they do a bad job the next time. It just seems ridiculous. They've forgotten what they learnt on the previous project. This is a sort of criticism that the construction sector often receives. And in a way, what Revaluing Construction is trying to do is say, well, why is that? Why do those names, why do those words spring to people's minds when they think about construction? Why don't they say, isn't it wonderful that construction has created the built environment around us that we enjoy and that enables us to function as human beings and as society? And that's what we're trying to do through Revaluing Construction, I suppose, is understand what is the problem, how can we stand aside from that and do things in a different way in order to really get the value out of the construction sector for society. So in simple terms, and this isn't where we started, in simple terms this came out of a lot of discussions. So Revaluing Construction is all about the value jointly created being maximised. So it's saying, how can we just make as much value as possible from the built environment? But then the second leg of it is very important. It's saying, and the resulting rewards are distributed equitably. So it's not a matter of the clients get loads and the construction industry suffers, or the designers feel as though they've made themselves famous but everybody else suffers. It's a matter of creating jointly as much value as we can together, and then making sure that everybody gets just rewards so that it's sustainable and so that it makes sense in the longer term for those in the sector. And one way of looking at this, and this is really just saying this is the perspective that certainly I'm coming from, one way of looking at this is to take a very broad perspective. So this is the building value cycle, and it's saying that in the pre-design phase, lots of potential value is created. There are lots of good ideas, and some of those are brilliant, but they won't all be realised. But certainly there are lots of good ideas in potential there. And then the next stage is the normal construction phase, where we deliver the maximum amount of that value that we can. And very often people would say a lot of that brilliant stuff at the pre-design and the design phase gets lost in construction. That's what they would say. And so one of the issues would be, how can we make sure that we don't lose all of that good value? Next phase there is realising maximum value in use. I could give you lots of examples, but I won't because we haven't got very long. But lots of examples of people taking over buildings and not realising how they work or what potential they have. Seen that a lot with schools, where there are quite sophisticated schools being created in the UK, and the teachers don't know how to operate them. They don't know how to actually, get the heating and the lighting and all those sorts of things to work to best effect, so they end up too hot or too dark or using too much energy. And it's not that it couldn't be done, it's just that they don't understand how to work with the building. They haven't been properly told how to do that. So realising maximum value in use is a very important thing. We can build brilliant stuff, but if people don't know how to use them to best effect, then we lose a lot of the value again. So value is the thing following right the way through here. Synergising urban value is another thing. The construction industry tends to think about particular buildings, and this is saying, but it's groups of buildings, it's the spaces between buildings, it's the transport systems, it's how the whole area hangs together. If we don't sort that out, then we don't get the most out of the combination of those different buildings. And the last one is saying, well, revaluing the industry. If we can get a construction industry that understands all of these phases, that creates lots of potential value, delivers a large proportion of that, helps the users get the most out of it in the use phase, puts together the buildings and so on in best combinations, then that's a sort of industry that can really maximise value, and then it will have plenty of value to share around between the participants. And one way of showing that is to say that this is the ideal, that all of these people get lots of value by working together, creating lots of potential, but then sharing it fairly. And there's quite a lot of feeling within the industry that it's not always shared very fairly between the participants. So the focus, I suppose, is creating value for all. It sounds idealistic, but the idea, and we've seen this work in some projects, but not in complete industries, it's actually saying, if we can get rid of some of the barriers, and if we can actually use the levers that we have, then actually there's a huge potential to do better. And I'll say more about that later from the previous workshops. The programme looks a bit busy-ish, I suppose. What I would say is you can relax. This programme's worked perfectly well in 5 different countries, and it's a matter of taking the issues in one chunk at a time. And the rapporteurs will help you with that. And generally speaking, it's a matter of creating lots of ideas and then sifting them down to the main ones and then sharing them between the groups. So the main parts are these. If I can get my mouse to work. Here we go. In this area, in the first discussion part, the idea is that we keep you with birds of a feather. I don't know if you use that expression, but the clients stick with the clients, the contractors stick with the contractors, and you have small groups of people who are from a similar stakeholder grouping, and they talk to each other about the things that are stopping things progressing well, the levers that perhaps could make things work better, so the driving forces and the restraining forces to improvement. And you don't have to worry about solutions or anything. At this point, you're just thinking, what are the things that are stopping things improve in the sector? What are the potential driving forces, things we've seen that make a difference? And you just concentrate on that. And what we found is that to some extent, you can just moan about the rest of the sector to each other. You know, you can just complain about the things that seem stupid to you. And that's fine. That's fine. So that's what you're doing at that stage. We then share what each group has found, so from different viewpoints, put those together, and incidentally we have coffee somewhere in the middle there, and then we have lunch, and then in this session here, this is the next group session, we mix you up, so that we have a client, a contractor, a designer and whatever in each group, and you're taking a more rounded view now, and in those groups you're looking for solutions, you're looking for actions that you could actually take. And it's actions that fit between the driving forces and the restraining forces, that build on the driving forces, that attack the restraining forces. So it's a pretty simple model, and the main thing is to stick with it and to go right the way through. And if we can do that, then we come up with an interesting answer at the end of the day. Again, we share the feedback from the groups there. And then in this last session, what we're talking about is KPIs and issues that actually could be improved in terms of clarity for the master plan. And in addition to that, the CIDB is very interested in the industry reaction to the Green Building Index and how that's going to be feasible for you to do, how that could actually be something you can respond to. Just to clarify this driving forces and restraining forces, this is the underlying model behind the day, and what it's saying is that this is Kurt Lewin's stuff from 1950 something or other, so it's an old model, but it's quite a well-known model. And what it's saying is that if you're at the status quo here, you could say, this is a social model, you could say, let's do X and it will sort it out. This is a different thing. This is saying wherever we are at any point in time is the result of a set of restraining forces and a set of driving forces being in equilibrium. And that's why we are where we are. That's why the industry is at the point it is. And if we can increase any driving forces or reduce any restraining forces, the equilibrium will move up. And so what we're trying to do is take it's actually quite a sophisticated perspective. It's saying things are just a matter of equilibrium, and if we can shift some of the levers and so on, then we can actually improve things. And we found this works quite well. So that's why in the first session we're asking you about restraining forces and driving forces. We'll then be looking for actions that can change them. What we end up with at the end of the day, this is from a completely different discipline, this is from managing workloads in academic or in universities. What we end up with at the end of the day, just so you know what we're heading towards, is something that has a set of restraining forces at the top, a set of driving forces at the bottom, and connected with them in the middle, certain actions that you've decided connect to the driving forces and attack the restraining forces. So that's what we're trying to do, is get to the end of the day with, in relation to the master plan and the Malaysian construction sector, a picture like this that has the restraining forces, the driving forces and the actions all nicely clarified. And we'll see. I mean, we've done this in 5 different countries, as I say, and we've got different views from each of those. And just to remind you, something that you've already seen, you of course have a plan. You have a plan 2006 to 15, where the sector is supposed to do these things. I won't read them again because you've heard them already. And in a way, what we're saying is, but how? You know, how are you going to do that? How can you move? And we're really focusing on implementation today. Any questions? Does that make any sort of sense? The key thing for me is that revaluing construction is all about seeing construction as a service. It's how does it produce the built environment to people to use. It's actually not all about building, it's about stuff that's useful to people in the use phase. Yep.
I saw your ideal group slide.
Yes.
Where you have all the groups, but the government agencies is not there.
No.
Is there a reason why?
Okay, the government agencies would be there as clients, They would be major clients. But you're right, it's a good point that they're a major player. In the UK, the government agencies like to sit in the background and talk about the sector as those people over there, and they don't like to be made too explicit. So maybe that's why I didn't put them there. But if you want them as a stakeholder, then yes, of course.
Because when they sit at the back, they just give us all their requirements, but they never want to listen what we feel that is right.
Yeah. Well, this is an opportunity for them to listen to you now, because the minister's turning up tomorrow, and I'm talking immediately after him. So, but yeah, the government in general is a huge player in every country, and often as a client, but also as a regulator. And so, yes, the sorts of actions are often things that they can do and nobody else can do. So, it's a good point. Thank you. It might be helpful right at the start if people introduce themselves to each other. So, in a way, it may take a little while, but if people could just say who they are, what organisation they're from, then it would give the other people in the room an idea who they're actually going to be in discussion with. Can we do that? Yeah. So, if we just very quickly moved around. So, if we go over here first.